Are you ready? Let's go!
Don't you sometimes just want to talk about everything? You know, there's days when you can just talk about anything. Need to sit back and chat about nothing at all? Nothing but Julie, coming at you with fun and creative topics and interviews.
Did you hear Julie's podcast? She's got the greatest topics.
Come join the chat about everything, anything, and nothing. So unwind and tune in to Nothing But Julie. Great topics and cool interviews with some pretty awesome people. And now, without further delay, here's Nothing But Julie.
Hi, everybody. It's Julie Schrager and Rhonda Marie with the Nothing But Julie podcast. What is up, Rhonda? How are you?
I'm good, Julie. How are you?
I am doing great. So we had an idea for a fun topic to talk about today, which is in school, what was your favorite subject / topic? I don't know about you, but it's not like I loved any subject going to school until electives were able to be chosen. What about you?
Like if I think back to high school, like there was nothing that I liked about the whole
experience.
Like, from morning to the time we left. I mean, I like doing my extracurricular activities like the sports and stuff, but
yes,
other than that, I didn't really, and I love to read. And so I always have loved to read. So I guess if that's a subject, but I didn't really so much like the English class. Because I just wanted to read for fun.
So when you were in high school, they didn't have any kind of like literature electives for you? It was just
it was just the basic, the basic English classes. And so I think, and I love to read and write, but I think being told like what I have to read and write is the issue for me. I just wanted to read what I wanted.
I'll tell you something. Now that you mentioned that, I think that you're right. I think that there's a difference when we're able to read what we want versus being told what to read, especially, I all due respect to teachers, and I have a lot of teacher friends. I know a lot of teachers, and this is nothing against teachers, including you, but you do have to adhere to a certain curriculum.
You do.
And you don't always have a choice with what you can always tell the children to read.
That's the issue.
That's the issue. So tell me, as a teacher, because I could only assume that it's very difficult to be giving the kids the structured type of books that they have to read throughout the year versus what you might really want to have them read.
It is. And so with teaching, that was one of the things and then, of course, it depends on what district you're in. Some you have more freedom and some you don't. But I think a part of the big issue is really funding. Because if you want to just read, you want to just randomly pick a book, now you have to be able to buy enough copies so that all of your kids can have one. And so you're talking 150 students. So you have to be able to buy 150 copies of this book.
Yep.
And so that becomes very expensive. And so it kind of there's the old classics that you read. And I'm just this firm believer that nobody in high school wants to read the classic novels.
I never did. Yeah.
Because they're
boring.
Older, they're written in different language. They're written with maybe more formal language. Mm-hmm. And then some of the themes and stuff, they're I don't get it. They want to read more modern stuff, but you're just kind of trapped.
You know what? It reminds me, and I wonder if you'll agree with this, that, we still live in an antiquated educational system. Yes. And I remember, I wasn't a teacher, but I was a substitute for years. Not that I was even close to being a teacher or doing what teachers do and did, but I was able to kind of, see what was being taught. And I remember there I had to have myself and the children, this was was this middle school? No. This was elementary school. Read aloud. And there were some kids that were just so introverted that they just, and some had anxiety. And some of them were just completely disinterested in reading. And I was thinking to myself at that time, like, I don't understand why this is still in the curriculum. Like,
You
it was
know,
around when I was a kid.
I hated having kids have to read out loud, because some kids, can't read very well, or they have a stutter, or whatever the reason, they get so nervous reading out loud that they just don't want to do it. I had more luck with that with middle school kids because they kind of don't care at that age.
Right.
But high school kids, like, they don't want to read out loud.
I never liked doing it.
I didn't either. And I'm a good reader. Like,
I
I
was
don't
always
struggle
afraid.
with it.
It's like, oh, and you know what? Right. But even if you're a good reader, I still think that when you're called on to have to read in front of the whole
Oh,
class, it's like
it's the worst.
it's the word you start to stutter your words and you get nervous. And you know what? I never understood or comprehended what I just read aloud because I was so nervous that I was going to screw up,
Exactly.
right? That I don't know what I just said.
And another thing kids do, if they know, like, if you're going around the room reading and they know everybody has to read like so much,
Right.
they don't listen to anything anyone else says because they're already skipping ahead.
Right,
To try to figure out what part they're going to read.
But again, it's an old fashioned, like I said, antiquated way of teaching. And that goes along the lines of math and how, with the new math that the kids now have, which is such a roundabout way of teaching instead of making it, more simplified. It's just, I think it's just one of those things where, and this is something that I've heard a lot, even when my son was younger, about how antiquated it is, just like with the, oh, I'm sorry. My sister just texted me and everything's fine. It's okay. But I remember even when my son was younger, like let's say the math, and then they have the what is it, like the Common Core tests, and it started to turn into a teaching for the test kind of thing, right?
Yes.
To where, and this, because it happens in every state, to where
It does.
It wasn't even like subject based anymore. Like if you wanted to learn something in history, it had to do with what was going to be on the test. It was not how it used to be. Certainly when I was younger, there were tests, but it wasn't even as bad as it is today. And kids, the only learning that they are learning is how to take the test and what's going to be on the test.
And they put so much pressure on it. Like, when I was teaching, they would, we had to take all these tests, and then we had to go and put every student, like, how would they pass the end of the year test at this point? And I was like, this is not even fun anymore. Like, it's not.
No. And that's the thing.
We're not learning. We're not teaching them to love learning. We're not teaching them to love a subject or to explore things. We're just teaching them how to take this standardized test at the end of the year.
I'll tell you, my son loved reading. And I loved reading to him. I loved reading with him. And then as he got older and he really got into like, the trilogy books or, different series of books, he loved it. But then I would say as early as third grade, which here in the state of Florida, they now have what they call the FSA, but it used to be called the FCAT. And
yes.
Right. And you take your first FCAT when you're in third grade. And my son had a lot of anxiety with this test. And it started from kindergarten, letting them know you're going to be taking this test. And he got incredibly nervous. And throughout 3/4 of the year, it was all about the test. Well, once the test was over, he had said to me, I don't want to read anymore. And they have what they call summer reading, which I'm sure you're aware of, and they give you a list of different books that you can read, none of which he was interested in, nothing. And so I said to the teacher, does he need to read this? Can he just read something? No. And it took almost an entire summer for him to read a short book because he just lost the desire, because all he was doing in school was reading and learning how to read and how to take the tests for reading, that they made reading, and by they, I mean the district, they made reading a task.
Yeah, they make it to where they don't even like it. How I combated that in my classroom, because there are certain books that they tell you have to read.
Yeah.
And so we did an outside reading project where they got to pick their own books.
Great.
And And that was, and all I did was give them like genres. You have to try these different genres out. You have to, and if don't like it, you never have to read that genre again. You just have to try it.
Right.
And if you decide you don't like a book, we had a reader's rights thing that we came up with. And so your right as a reader is to not like a book. Your right as a reader is to not finish a book
Oh
if
my
you
God,
don't
I
like it.
love that.
Yes. And so it kind of like
Gave them
put
the
the fun
choice.
back. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
gave them a choice. And so I had a lot of kids be like, I really found a love of reading again in your class, or like, I didn't even know I liked reading, but because you let me pick books that I was interested in, I read them, and I was like, well, that's the whole point, I feel like, was to
That's so
get them
nice.
reading.
Good for you. I remember throughout the school year as well, my son, and this is not anything that I had to do when I was younger, and I can't remember the name of it. And yet he did it all throughout elementary school, but that seems like ages ago. And he would have to read like snippets on the computer, and then he'd have to
Oh,
take a test.
yes.
And then he had like this level, his reading level.
Yes.
And I know there's a name for it, and it escapes me. Do you know what it is?
I can't think of it either.
Okay, but you know what I
Jacob did
mean.
it as well.
Oh,
Yes.
it's so funny every time you say Jacob, because that's Jacob. Mine's Jacob too, but I call him Jake. It's so funny. Except when I'm angry, it's Jacob or Jacob Kyle, because there's more oomph in the syllables.
In the middle, yes.
But and I remember that he really detested reading so much that even when he got on the computer, he was actually almost deliberate in not doing well. Like he deliberately wouldn't read it, and he would.
And I think that those tests are like, they're not accurate that way, because like your son is deliberately not doing well so that he doesn't have to increase the reading level, which makes the reading more difficult.
Perhaps that
Like,
was it. I mean, I never really discussed it with him, but he felt like a robot. It's like every
right.
day he had to do this, he had to do that. You know what he really hated the most? And not to change the subject, but real quickly, like in elementary school, they make you walk. Well, in Florida, we don't have corridors. We don't have indoor
Right. The schools are
schools
all
like
outside.
And
Mm-hmm.
so when you walk outside, you're all walking in a straight line, like a bunch of ducks. And
Yes.
he always, right? And he always felt that he had to follow the pack, and he is not a pack follower. He is not the kind of kid that's a follower. I'm not going to say, oh, he's a leader. My son's a leader. It's just he's not a follower. He didn't like having to do what everybody else had to do. And he would say to me when he was a baby in elementary school, I don't like having to always walk behind these kids or walk in front. Why can't I just walk to the cafeteria like normal? Why do I have to walk in a line? And why do I have to wear a uniform? Why do I have to look like everyone else? Why do I have to read this? And I'll tell you something, for a little kid, it was a very intelligent question that he was asking me, one of which I could not answer equally intelligent without being like, you're effing right. I agree with you. Yeah,
Right.
because I did. And I can't remember the response I came up with. Knowing me, it was probably what I just said. But because of that, I think he became defiant at such an early age in having to do exactly what everyone had to do. And that's one of the reasons why in high school he started doing part-time virtual, because it gave him the freedom to be individual and do things his way and at his pace and pick his classes. And I'll be honest with you, there were a lot more electives on virtual than there was at the public school.
So that is something that I've always, like, at every school I've taught at, I've wondered, like, with the exception of when I taught at a magnet school, because they had quite a few electives and interesting things for the kids to do. But there will not be a lot of electives. And I wonder, like, I assume it has to do with money. I'm not really quite sure, but I'm sure it's all goes back to money. But sometimes, like, the kids would have very few electives to pick from, and like, they're like, they'd come to me and they're making their schedule and they're like, I don't want to, like, I'm not an artist, so I don't want to do any of these arts. Like, and I'm not, like, there's nothing for me to take.
Exactly.
There's nothing for me to take.
I'll tell you something. My sister too was an artist. You know my sister. I don't know if you
Mhm.
follow her on
I do.
Instagram. Yeah, she's extremely talented, and it's not just what she does today. It's things that she's been doing her whole life. I mean, she used to draw these incredible pictures, and she used to take art. And I remember that there were not many art classes, and so this is bringing me back to the subject area. So, what I said at the beginning, what was your favorite subject? Well, I'm going to actually talk about one subject that wasn't really considered a subject that was my least favorite, which was gym.
Oh,
And
I hated gym.
okay, but check this out. So because I was an idiot back when I had just graduated as a junior, and I say that because I was being an idiot and lazy, I waited until the last minute to go and choose my last electives
Oh,
for school. So when I went, like, I don't know, the day before school started, I'm kidding, but who knows? It was probably me then. It was
right.
summertime. I was 17, you know? Uh, I had to take gym. And I think back then you only needed to take 2 or 3 classes. And so I, of course, like many other kids, decided to wait until my latter years in high school to finally take it. Well, guess when it was only available?
First hour.
First hour at like 7 in the morning. And look, who the hell wants to get up, dress up, put the clothes on, look the high school part with the hair. And, back in the 80s, it was a lot of hair and the makeup and the this and the that and having to get up early just to make yourself, look decent, only to sweat it all off.
Oh, I know. I had gym first hour one year, and
Oh,
I was, I mean, and I don't even know why I kept taking gym. I think because it was easy. And I didn't even have to because I was an ROTC and they'll
oh,
count that as your gym credit. And I think I ended up taking gym like 2 years. And it was first hour one year. And I was like, I just can't. I had my mom call the school until they moved it to be my last class of the day. Because I said, look, I'm going right to cross country or track after school. So I could just, when the day is done, I'll go, I'll get changed, I'll do PE, and then I'll do my sport and it'll be fine. I said, but I just can't do it first hour because it was
yeah,
the same thing. Like you said, I didn't want to get ready for school and then have like, I like what you get like 10 minutes at the end of the class to get dressed again. Like
yeah.
I can't shower and put makeup on and fix my hair in that
No,
amount of time.
no, no, absolutely not. And you know what? I'll tell you something. In the end, it obviously I remember that that's what I did, and I think that it kind of changed me in a way to not being a procrastinator with certain things. We're all procrastinators in one shape or form, but I never forgot that. And I realized at that point that, when I'm going off to like secondary school or college or, whatever, people decide to do, that I should probably, jump on it as soon as I can just to get everything. And I remember that when my son was going to school, I was like, look, you're going to want to jump on this as soon as you can, as soon as, like, I think they did it in alphabetical order, which was stupid because we're S,
Oh, and
right?
that's so unfair to like
It's so dumb.
to kids that are, have like a Z last name.
Well, yeah, but for Jake, although there were more available electives virtually, he actually took all of his core classes on virtual and took the electives at school because he actually did much better virtually with his core classes and felt that if he went back to high school, it would diminish his grades. He was the kind of kid that did much better on his own with the core classes. And so versus being in like a public room and everything having to go so fast or too slow or having like an exact deadline for certain things as it did on virtual. But virtual was um more open to you doing it at your own pace. And certainly there were deadlines, but it was kind of more like you have between this date and this date. to get things done.
Right.
And it was not easy because, he was taking major core classes during that time, but he was also very hands-on. So he was able to take more hands-on type, electives back at
Yeah,
school.
that's what I think is missing. There were no, I mean, when I went to school, they still had things like wood shop and stuff.
Yes.
But then when I taught at a school, it was the first time I taught in an alternative school, which didn't have a lot in the way of electives, but those kids were trying to get their credits back because they'd gotten behind for whatever reason. And but then when I went and taught in my first regular public school, they had things like wood shop and different stuff, but they didn't have no teachers were getting certified in those areas.
Oh, really?
And so there
Okay.
was, yeah, and they were actually going to get rid of the wood shop and not have that as an elective anymore. And there was a guy who was a substitute teacher at the school, and he was a long-term sub, so he just came every day and filled in for whoever needed it.
That was like
And
me. That's what I did.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so he really wanted to become a teacher, and it wasn't so much for him, it wasn't about what he was going to teach, it was just teaching in general. And he went and got certified and became the woodshop teacher because he knew he would have a job, and it
Right.
was a fun thing to do with the kids, so they got to keep it. But I think a lot of schools are losing those kind of electives
Well,
because of that.
yes, and especially the arts. And that has
Yes.
always. Did you ever see Mr. Holland's Opus?
I haven't.
Okay, keep that title. It's with Richard Dreyfuss, Mr. Holland's Opus. Excuse me. And it's about a man who started writing his opus at a very, very young age and got married, got the house, realized that he had to get a full-time job. So he decided to become a teacher and believed that if he became a teacher that, he'd have summers off and it would be so easy. But it
Right.
actually really turned into a job. And he wound up in the beginning not loving it and wound up loving it. And that's all I'm going to tell you because I don't want to ruin it. But if you do have some time to watch it, it's worth the watch. And the point of me talking about this was what? What was I
Oh,
talking?
being a teacher.
I know, but what was it about the stupid? What I can't remember why the hell I was talking about this. Well, anyway, it's one of my favorite movies, and I think it was me talking about actually, the love of being a teacher. But
Uh-huh.
he actually never 100% finished his opus and
Because he became a teacher
because he
instead.
became a teacher instead. But it was about the arts and how that's what I wanted to talk about, and the music and how what they did throughout the movie was every few years would pass and they would show like all the different kinds of music that had passed throughout those years, like the Beatles and
Oh,
this type,
yeah.
right? And then they would kind of start showing the school and how the clothing changed and the children changed and the attitudes changed, and slowly how the arts started to become a funding issue, and that if there's one thing to get rid of, it's got to
It's
be
they
music or
always
art.
yeah, they always want to cut the arts. I worked at a school
Horrible.
that they were actually going to cut the band program.
Hmm.
And um I mean, ultimately they ended up not having to, but it was like really, I mean, and a lot of kids were scared because they loved music and they loved band, and they took like, we had a lot of music classes, and they said we just can't afford to keep this all the time. And it ended up we cut some music classes, and the band teacher had to work at two schools, at a
Oh,
middle school and a high school, in
wow.
order to keep a full-time job. But that was the only way we could keep the band program. And I
See, that's
thought,
it. That's just horrible.
I think that's just terrible because, like, as the generations go, if we continue to cut the arts, and I understand that math and STEM and all of those things are very important, but if we continue to cut the arts, who's going to become our artist?
Well, that's what it's interesting you said that because I was going to bring that up that in Mr. Holland's opus, someone had said if you keep cutting the arts, there's going to be no one to talk about. There's going to be
Right.
no one to write about
Right.
because
Because
you're not going to have kids learning things in high school
no.
where they can become the next violinist or the next
Right.
pianist
I
or
mean, because you're going to have kids who never get exposed to it, and they might not
exactly.
even, they might have a natural talent for it and they never know because
That's
they never
exactly
get
right.
that exposure.
That's exactly right. And that is what has been plaguing a lot of the schools throughout the United States. It's funny because Japan would never take away the arts. That's how
Right.
they teach. I was watching Rhonda. This was the coolest video I saw the other day. For gym or PE, they had kindergarteners, 5-year-olds, right? Bouncing a ball, like a basketball, like a small basketball in each hand. Now imagine a bunch of 5-year-olds in a circle. Okay. And each one of them is bouncing a ball in each hand. They bounce for, I don't know, 4 or 5 bounces. And then they kind of slowly pass it on to the person to their right. And then they bounce and then they bounce and they pass it and they bounce and they bounce and they pass. And I'm watching this video of these little kids doing this in sync with each other. And they were learning. I'm sure that there's some kind of like academic, quote or name for what this was, but it was the coolest thing. Whatever it was that they were trying to teach them, they were teaching them through physical fun, right? And
Right.
they didn't get rid of PE. They're not getting rid. And I'll be honest with you, the only way I survived high school was because of music and being able to put things like in songs or to certain beats or having music on in the background or looking forward to actually going to chorus. And I used to be in band too. And I played the clarinet, the violin, the viola, guitar, and I was in chorus. And I only got through the day because I knew at some point of the day I was going to be going into that room where I could sing.
Right.
You
And
know?
I think that's the case for a lot of kids. Like they're not at school to learn math, like they're at school because they get to do their fun thing.
Yes. That's exactly it. So, the other subject I did not like, that I had a very difficult time in was math
Oh, me
because,
too.
right. And it was so hard for me because, like I said earlier, in a curriculum, you have to teach a certain amount within the course of a year. So you're speeding through and you are among all different types of learners and children that learn differently. Some are more, can learn more complex things like my sister, whereas me, I'm more of a visual person. And so whenever something would be taught in math, I remember I had a friend who was sitting next to me and she got it. She got it right away. And I would ask her to explain it to me. And she would, put it down on paper in a different way so I could understand it visually. It was so hard for me to keep up because and not only was I not good in math, but they sped through the process so quickly. And in turn, with my son, I saw the same thing. That's why he did so much better on virtual because he was able to do it at his own pace. And he also had a math tutor that kind of reiterated what he kind of had to teach himself.
Yeah.
So he had that little extra one-on-one, which was all he needed. He just needed a little bit more explanation. And so math was not fun for me. And less like I was really good at long division and multiplication, like certain things I caught on to. But when it came to like algebra, forget it.
So I had a math teacher in 8th grade tell me, because I switched schools in 8th grade, and I had fallen behind in math because at the first school I was getting bullied, and so I stopped going to the math class. And then when I went to the teacher after I got caught, skipping the class, when I went to the teacher and said, like, I haven't been coming to your class because like these girls are being very mean to me and they're in that class. So they switched my schedule around is what they tried to do. So they put me in a different math class. And so I went to him and said, I don't understand this math. I don't understand this algebra stuff that we're doing. And he told me, it's okay. You're a girl and they're not good at math anyway.
No.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that was a little loud, but wow.
Yes. So he told me I didn't have to be good at math because I was a girl. And so I took that and ran with it. I mean, I didn't learn any more math. I sat in class, but it didn't bug me that I was bad at it because I had been told by this teacher that it was okay to be bad at it since I was a girl. And so I just went with it and I never really learned it. And then when I switched schools, the bullying got so bad that my mom let me switch schools. And so I switched back to the school I had gone to previously, like in 6th grade. And I didn't know any math. And then that math teacher was like, no, you have to learn the math. And I told this new math teacher, I was like, no, it's fine. I don't have to learn math because I'm a girl.
Oh
And
my God.
yes. And he just looked at me and he was like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Did you tell him who told you that?
Yes. And he was like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And he tried to catch me up, and I ended up passing the class and, moving to high school, but I never really like got math. I could get just enough to get through the class.
Wow, that
And so I
is
always hated
unbelievable.
it.
Well, I mean, I would have too. I mean, I can't. Who was it? Was it your guidance counselor that said that?
It was my math teacher. My actual
Oh
math
my
teacher.
God.
Yes, and so people like that should not be teaching children. But
Such a horrible thing to
right?
say.
Like, why would you say that to a student who's coming to you and saying, "Hey, I didn't understand, but I'm trying to get better. So
Oh my
can
God.
we? Is there tutoring? Is there something?" Because my mom said you have to go and ask him if there's tutoring. She made me do it.
Well, of course, yeah.
But yeah, so
Did you tell your mom?
Yeah, and that's ultimately why I got to switch schools, because she was like, okay, now I'm fighting both you getting bullied and this things with this teacher, and so let's just fix this problem. And I assume she told the new school like what was going on.
Wow, that is unbelievable.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Wow.
I couldn't imagine just telling kid, well, it's okay, you're not good at reading. Like,
oh my God. One of the girls, or maybe both, they were sisters that lived up the street who tutored my son in math. They're both engineers.
Oh.
Math.
Yeah.
So, I mean, shut up, you dumbass teacher.
Yeah, I mean, Jacob's tutor in high school was a girl that was going to school for mechanical engineering. So, and then one of my good friends is a math teacher who also tutored him in high school. So,
you know what? To me, I don't know. Maybe it's a boy thing, or maybe it's just because I had a boy. He didn't have difficulty per se with it. It was really just the way of learning. I remember when he was younger, I was looking at private schools because, I was like, there's no way my son is going, to high school, public high school in the state of Florida, even though where we moved specifically because the schools are one of the best. But what people don't know is when you say that is based on the FCAT grades. When you have like an A, right? When you have like an A, B, C, F school, whatever, that's all based on how well the kids did on FCAT. And when I moved here at the time, I didn't know. I thought that was just, based on a lot of different statistics, only to find out, nope, this is what it's based on.
Right. It's only based on the standardized test. I think a lot of people don't understand how those school grades
They
work.
don't. And I have since then, I mean, it's been a long time, seen people asking, saying, oh, I'm moving from here to, to your area. Can you tell me which are the best schools? And people say, oh, this one and that one. And I would respond and say, well, I hope that you're telling them this not based on the grade of the school, but actual be going there or your children going there. I would never recommend a school based on just the FCAT. And so I was looking for private schools for my son to go to. Not that I wanted to spend the money. And I'm a product of public school and I believe in public school, but I also knew what was to come. And so I went to this one place that, I'm not going to mention the name. But what was really, really cool during the tour was she showed us how each room where the classes were, each subject in each room had 3 or 4 different learning areas for the different brain types.
Oh, yes.
Right. And so because my son is more visual, then they had the table over here for, him to learn visually. And I thought, oh my God, I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. Okay, this is where he has to go. Wasn't until we stopped and we were, oh my God, I remember this to the day. And there was this cute little girl in her little uniform. And she said hello to the woman. I forget her name. Let's just say it was Mrs. Smith. And she seemed like extremely mature, like too mature. Hi, hello, Mrs. Smith. How are you today? And I'm thinking, oh my God, and she's so polite. And the woman, Mrs. Smith, said, "Oh, hello, dear. How are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm very well. Thank you." And she said, "What is it that you're doing?" And she said, "Oh, I needed to get a drink of water." And she said, "I'm sorry, you needed to get a drink of," and she goes, "Oh, agua." And I was like, "Okay, bye." Like I just thought to myself, it wasn't the Spanish. No, it wasn't Spanish. No. It was she said something more like, "Oh, I need to rehydrate myself." And I thought to myself, okay, you know what? There ain't no way that my son is going to be talking like that just because they want the children to learn different vocabulary. And then I found out later on that it was run almost like a convent, that the way that she had spoken to the woman is almost in an adult type of way, because they are literally training these kids to act like adults when they are
But
not
but they're
even,
not adults
but
yet.
they're not. And so it was at that point where I was like, okay, so I see what's happening here. And as much as
Right.
I loved the whole kind of outline of what was happening in the school, I could not see nor allow my son to walk up to her and say, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Smith. How are you today?
I'm going to rehydrate
I'm going
myself.
to rehydrate myself." I mean, and
Right,
he's a boy, like,
because in the, if he were to, I mean, socially, that's going to be a killer among other kids.
yeah, like when he's older.
Right. Like, I mean,
He does not need to be
people
doing
are
that at like age, 6, 7, 8. I mean,
right.
no, but
People, and there's ways to teach vocabulary that don't
yes.
require us becoming socially awkward like that.
Oh, he would have killed me. It would have been the worst mistake I ever made. And so
Uh,
that's why we decided, when he was older, to do the part virtual, because we were fortunate enough to have that in our state, that he could choose to do that and incorporate it with public schools. So he kind of had the best of both worlds. And look, it worked for him. It might not work for everyone. I know there's a lot of people that are not happy with the virtual right now, and they can't wait for their kids to go back to school. But
but I think part of that is like it's not their choice.
it's not their
It's
choice.
not their choice. So
Yeah.
like maybe their kid is not, it's not working out for their kid, but I think for a lot of kids it ends up working out
You
really
know
well
what?
for them.
Yeah, I know that I know a few. I'm not really friendly with many people of young children anymore, but I just happen to live in a community where there's all different age types. And I do know a few where it's just they're like, "Oh my God, I cannot wait until, they go back to school." And then there's others where they're just like, "Oh, everything is fine." And it really depends on the child too.
Oh, definitely.
So what else did you like in school besides, the ones that we were just talking about? Was there any one that you could have done without, or maybe, I don't know, replaced it with something? Oh,
You
I
know,
wanted to tell you, I did take shop.
oh, did you? I took
Yes, I did.
drafting actually,
Oh, that's fun
and
too.
so I really love that we went to competitions
Isn't
and
there like
um,
math involved in that also?
there is, but it's more like it was just a very introductory course, and so that's all I could do because when you get up into the higher ones, they actually require that you're in calculus or other things,
Oh,
and so I could only take the introductory one, but I really enjoyed it, and I think that the math kind of held me back from some careers because actually when I was going to college, there were several degree paths that I was super interested in, but they required things like advanced math, and I just
mm.
wouldn't do it.
You know what? I loved shop because I was such a tomboy growing up. I loved it, and I did so well in that class. I was the only girl that was in that class at that time. I don't know if there were other girls in at other periods, but I was the only girl, and I just remember like the boys were picking on me and stuff like that, and I totally ignored it because I was having such a great time, like picking on me, like, "You're a girl. What are you doing here?" kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, but I was just so happy being in there that I just had a grand old time. I remember learning there was something we had to do with a battery, something with batteries and making your own something or other with batteries. And that's how there was also this really cool thing that you could create to test the life of your battery. You had to like make your own strip. So when you put the battery on like one end of the metal, it let you know how good or low the battery was. I remember doing that. I can't remember what else I did. The other thing I remember was having to go there to get my defensive driving certificate because I took oh, that was fun too. They
I think,
actually had defensive driving at
I
our school.
never took I never took any driving classes in school.
Did they offer it?
They had driver's ed, but driver's ed was only first hour. And
Oh, I'm sorry. It was driver's
so,
ed. I took
yeah,
defensive driving when I was older.
so when driver's ed was only first hour, and because I graduated through an alternative program within my school, so I could only I did ROTC and then French, and then I went to my alternative program for the rest of the day to do my regular classes. So it's kind of like your son, where he was doing virtual and then doing the electives in school.
Right. Okay.
So I kind of had a similar thing. And I could only do those two first and second hour because of the way the schedule worked out. And so that's why I couldn't take driver's ed at school. So I just had to take it at like a outside company that my mom then paid for. But I took it.
That was in Mr. Holland's opus. That was one of his summer jobs that he did.
Was teaching driver's ed.
Teaching driver's ed, which is I think what a lot of teachers did for
yes,
summer options, Yes. But I as I drive around my area, I always see like the student driver things on top of the cars.
We see them all the time.
Yeah. It was defensive driving. And I remember that I was in like the very back of the room and I was in an actual car seat and you would watch the screen and you would have to, and I guess it was somehow connected to something to where, the way you were driving would show up on a computer at that time and then they could rate you. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how, because I don't remember computers being that huge, in 87, but I just remember getting a grade and not knowing how they even, the instructor even knew what I was doing. So that's why I think that it was all connected, but it was so much fun. It felt like you were like in a real car.
That would have been fun.
It went towards, just like here in high school, when you take a defensive driving course at the school, you need like some kind of certificate for you to get your license. And but what does that do? I can't remember. That was one of my favorite subjects. And I did really, really like English. To this day, I really like English. I was really good with grammar and with writing and all that. The reading part, I hated. I was never a big reader up until later in life, which I love now. But I did love the whole, I was in spelling bees when I was younger because I used to love spelling. And I had a certain way of teaching myself how to remember words like comfortable. I would remember as comfortable, and right. And I know. And I would, what is it like? Oh, come on. What is the name of that state that, like Connecticut, I remember as Connecticut, right? Things like that. And and like I said, I don't know, maybe it was because I have a musical background. Like I would remember the syllables as like a beat, like comfortable, even though I wouldn't pronounce it that way because I knew it wasn't pronounced, but in my head to help myself spell it, I would remember that. But back then it was, English was fun. I think like as the years have gone by, it's become, like I said, it's just more work, more of a task. I don't feel like it's how it used to be. Everyone is all about, the number game. And unless, you're really good at being able to pick things up on a whim, many kids are just not going to do very well in that kind of a setting.
Yeah. That I don't know. I think they need to add more, maybe fun classes. I don't know. Like I said, I know how important like science and the technology and stuff is, but I think they're missing out on some things.
I liked science when it became hands-on and I was in the lab. Right? Well, I mean, except for the dissecting of the frogs, which was, oh God. But aside from that, it was the experiments, right? And you had to wear the gloves and the eyewear, and it was a lot of fun doing that. But prior to that and sitting and having to learn and read, my son, when he first, I don't know if I had mentioned this, but when he first went in to high school as a freshman, he wanted to take shop like I did. not because he thought it was going to be easy, because he wanted to take it. Well, the first semester, nothing. The kids didn't do anything, no hands on
It's
anything.
all the safety stuff, right? They just have to go over.
Actually, what the teacher did was, and his name was Mr. Bollinger. And he told the kid, every time you would step into the classroom, you had to sit down and you had to read. He just sat there falling asleep while the kids had to sit and read what he was not teaching. And within the text were a lot of math, I don't know, things that they had to learn with math, but he wouldn't explain it. And it was a lot of math that my son had never learned before. And then he would be tested on it when it was never taught. So he was stuck having to read all these chapters by himself, learn all these mathematical equations that he had no idea about, and he would wind up doing very poorly on the tests. And I'm like, A, why is this still continuing? Like the whole first semester, because he wanted all of the kids to read the entire textbook.
Why though?
Because he's an idiot. So
like that's just such a weird.
It made no sense. It was just an excuse. So I, of course, went straight to the school complaining, saying, this is not teaching. There's no hands on anything. Then when the second semester came, there was very, very little hands on anything. So I took him out of the class and told the guidance counselor that I want him to be I don't want that grade to be in the books. I said that he's a freshman and he's starting off bad because of the grade. And he had like a C or maybe even a D. I can't remember. In shop. You should have seen what all these other kids, all these other kids were pretty much where he was. And I'm like, don't you see like there's like something going on here with all these kids? Well, anyway, from what I remember, they had spoken with the teacher. I don't know. But I took him out and they gave him grade forgiveness. So he would now be a semester behind with anything. So he wound up taking one half a semester elective online, which was, I think it might have been gym, or I don't even know what the hell it was, like half gym. Like here in Florida, you have to take like half gym and half something else.
Oh, like a health class. Yeah.
Like a health class. Yeah. But I mean, I just remember that this is supposed to be fun. And all this guy is doing is literally making the kids sit and read. And do you think that they were reading? They were all sleeping or bullshitting or were on their phones. And my son, I remember he came home with the book and I was trying to figure out these equations. Like, I have no idea. And I said, well, certainly he showed you how to do these. He goes, no, he sits behind his desk with his legs up on the desk on his phone. That's what he did. And
that is terrible.
Yeah, it was really bad, but it was upsetting to me because that is so far from what we did in shop. We did nothing but hands-on from day one. I've never even read about equations. I don't ever remember even using math except for a simple ruler when I was in shop. I never understood how there's so much that this guy thinks. I mean, it's a wood shop. Give him wood, give him a nail, have them create something.
Right.
Like, why are you making these kids read about, I don't know, what seemed to be like calculus type equations? Even my sister, who's extremely bright, was like, what the hell is this? Why is he learning this in 9th grade? I'm like, it's not even math. It's shop. It's shop. It was just, it was so funny. But I will say, I really, really, really loved English. And I took this one elective, which was all about the stock market. If you could believe it, they actually had this kind of, it was considered a math elective, but it was all about, at the time, reading the newspaper and the stock prices and how to learn about stocks. And it was so cool. But, I don't know if you ever had to do this, but when I was younger, they didn't have it on the computers and you had to like really look at the fine print of all the different stocks and understand them. And I became so good at it. And then the teacher started to do these like mock things where you would pretend to buy stock and he would be like New York Stock Exchange. and how the
That
whole
would be
thing
fun.
worked with investing and stuff. Yeah, I really like that. But I mean, that's really all I could think of. And the social aspect of it. But that's it. There was nothing else that I really loved as far as subjects. Nothing really got me.
I mean, like I liked English. I mean, in college, I of course I have an English education degree and a
Yeah.
literature master's, so I liked it enough to pursue it. But I couldn't. And I almost think that I picked English to become a teacher because I didn't love English in school, and I thought, how can someone take these things like reading and writing and make them so awful that kids hate it? And so I think I wanted to
Pretty easy.
become a teacher that they actually liked it.
You know what? I remember when my son was at the latter part of elementary school, and I knew then that he was going to have trouble with math. And so his teacher actually stayed after school to tutor him. And I remember her saying to me, I don't even know how to do this. And I don't know how to teach this. She said that to me. I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to teach it. The teacher, and I was just like, it was at that moment that I realized that, how does every teacher know? Unless you're in a specific subject that maybe you went to school for. But when you're in elementary school, especially now, and you have to teach all the subjects, or you're doing like half and half, what if you weren't good in math and you have to
Right.
teach it?
See, that would be my like if I were to ever teach elementary school, which I mean, I'm not certified to teach it, but that doesn't matter. They can still hire you if they want to.
Oh, okay.
But like that would be my fear, is that they would be like, okay, now you need to teach math. And then all of the kids that went through my poor math classroom would have no idea what they were doing.
Yeah, I get it. Because when you become an elementary school teacher, they don't teach you the subjects. They teach you
They teach you how to teach the subjects.
how to teach the subject. And I think I touched on this once before. That's why my sister, she's got her master's in early childhood education, and she never taught a day because once she finally became a teacher, and this was later in her life when her kids were, close to grown, where she was like, if I can't teach the way I want to teach, then I don't want to be a teacher. And I just remember being like, well, why did you go to school then? How did you not know, that
Because you really don't.
you don't
Like,
know,
it's really
you don't know, even though you have children in school. And I got it. I was like, I totally get it. And this is why there's a lot of teachers who are leaving their jobs because the pay sucks. And they are holding so many teachers accountable for things they shouldn't be accountable for. Now in Florida, it's for the last few years, it's been dependent on what the FSA scores are. And if you don't get a certain FSA score in your class, you're going to be held accountable. And that's going to have to do with.
You get put on a plan for improvement.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you know this.
Yeah, and it's really like, and so then like, when they're judging teachers on this, I've mostly worked at schools that are lower socioeconomic status, high minority schools. A lot of them have single parents, or they're living in the system, and they don't have when they go home at night, their mom might be at work, and so they don't have someone to sit down and help them with homework or do those kinds of things with them. But yet all of those things that are beyond a teacher's control, like I can't control what that kid's home life is like at all. And so, but then they're expected to come to school and take this test and do well on it. And if they do poorly on it, then it's going to reflect back on the teacher when there's all these other, things that are way out of the control.
Yeah. And it's such a shame. And it's so horrible. When I was an attendance clerk at a middle school, and it was a Title I school. And there were a lot of extremely bright children that just got overrun by the system or didn't have what they might have needed at home.
Right.
It was a mostly Black school. And, in the poorer kind of section in a certain area in Florida. And there were so many kids that just, they
have so many other things that they can't always focus on school.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately, when you are the parent of children or the parents of children, and now you've got these kids, you've got your work, you've got this, you've got that, and the children become affected by everything that you can't do for them. And I would think at a Title I school there would be certain things that would be more understood that they can't afford, like letting the kids stay late in the library when they can maybe use the computer because they might not have one at home
Right.
to do certain research on, but
Yeah.
they
So
didn't have that.
I've had kids write their essays on their phone in the notes section of their phone. And they would be very upset because they'd be like, I made this essay, but I can't format it correctly because we don't have a computer at home and I only have my phone. And as a teacher, I could make allowances for them,
Right.
knowing that. But when the state sets the standards, they set the same standards
For
for every
everyone.
school. Yeah.
Yeah. But did you notice at all? And I know that you weren't teaching during COVID, but I had done an interview with a man who's like the chair of the school board in Palm Beach County. And some of my questions were about, what are you going to be doing, about lower income families that can't afford Wi-Fi, that don't have laptops. And he had said that the district has made a lot of provisions for these children, and that laptops will not only be delivered to their homes, but they will be able to get onto into certain Wi-Fi hotspots. So they
Yes.
they created that, I think, with Xfinity or whatever it is, Comcast, and they created it with that, and Verizon, and like a lot of different wireless companies that have towers throughout the state. I'm sorry, throughout the county. So if you can't maybe get onto, let's say, Comcast, and they would give you a passcode to get onto Verizon or AT&T. So they really, I think, tried their best to accommodate, those children.
I think so. I think so now. I don't like prior to COVID, I
No,
feel like
no,
it was kind of well, like because I
few
would
and
get
far between.
great. I would get suggestions like, "We'll tell them to go to the public library,"
Oh my
and I'm
God.
like, "Okay, well, I have this 14-year-old who is in ninth grade. How should they get there?"
Yeah,
Um,
or
you
or
know,
he or she is watching their baby sister while the mom is working, or you have a latchkey
right,
kid, right? There's always this, when you have parents who are working, and some have to do a double income. The question is, what do you then do? And I remember when the lockdown started, the school year was still in progress, and there was more than one child in a household. They would interview the parents, and they would say, how am I supposed to do this? I can't afford more than one computer, and I've
yes,
got four kids, and they're
right,
all in different grades. And how are they supposed to be, all of them doing their work when I don't even have Wi-Fi and I only have one computer, and I work part-time, and now I'm working from my home? How am I supposed to help them? And, it was a huge, huge effort and I think that the district tried their best. I think that it was all new, but I think that all of this has given them a lot of ideas for now, for the future, on how to handle things like this, because there's many kids that are going to want to continue doing virtual. You
I
know,
think so.
what would make me crazy, and I just have to say it: the folks who had no problem with affordability of anything. And I would see them taking pictures of, their three or four children in all different rooms on all different computers, all set up beautifully in different
Yep.
rooms with bulletin boards and this and that. And all I kept thinking about is, look, good for you. You can afford it. That's great. But it made me think of the interview. And what about all of these other parents and children who can't afford the four computers in the four different rooms, and and you're not working, and you're able to bounce from room to room to room and help the kids. It just made me think about, not everyone is in the same boat.
No,
And
no, that's
what can you do? And that's why, it was a really great interview, but it also, I haven't had a kid in high school, or in school, in public school, in a while. Same with you. And it's just like, to to be seeing everything that's going on, and all of these new Facebook groups popped up that I decided to join to educate myself with what's happening in the world. Oh my God. There were some really devastating, stories, especially when maybe parents started to get sick,
Oh yeah.
and maybe they were hospitalized. And now these kids are supposed to meet, deadlines when it came to schoolwork. And some of them were being, they were exceeding their attendance and their work was suffering. It was just like, oh God, there's got to be something, better. But I do know of one person actually that lives around the block from me whose child is going to continue doing virtual for the rest of the year, even though the school has opened. But, she's a junior and she's been devastated by this. You've got kids that are really social and kids that might be on the football team or cheerleaders, and that all kind of, it's for some kids, high school is a great thing that they look forward to, and to have to be stuck doing virtual, it's like, oh my God, that's not exactly what they planned on having when they were, older. But I think she's going to be going back to brick and mortar for her senior year.
Oh, that's good. I know a lot of kids that graduated during COVID were pretty disappointed because their senior year was not what they were expecting.
Well, can you imagine? I mean, my son didn't care one way or the other if he walked for high school. I think it's because of the mix between the two schools. He didn't really care. For college, yeah, he walked. But I know that there are several people, hundreds, thousands of kids that couldn't walk. And that's the one thing they looked forward to for a long period of time. And to wind up having to do it virtually, ugh, I can only imagine what that might have done for them. I don't know if there's any way to make that up.
I mean, not really. I think they just have to,
Look forward to doing
yep,
walking in college.
yep, just move on to the next thing.
All right, honey. So let the people know how they can contact you.
They can find me on social media at the Rhonda Marie, and that's on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.
Perfect. And same here, Nothing But Julie, and on streaming platforms, Nothing But Julie. Feel free to subscribe and like the podcast and listen every Thursday. All right.